Welcome to Too Fond of Books. My name is Janelle, and this is my wrap-up for week 2 of Victober. I can hardly believe it that October is already half over. I mean, this month is going by so fast, but I am reading some great Victorian books, and I'm excited to talk to you about what I have been reading. I am in the middle of five Victorian books at the same time. I don't know, am I a glutton for punishment? I don't know, but I am enjoying all of them so much. And I have completed 2 Victorian era historical mysteries. I'm going to save those to the end. I'm going to tell you briefly about the books that I'm in the middle of, and I have a few things to say about those. So first off, I'm going to start with the group read, The Mayor of Casterbridge by Thomas Hardy. I have read 30 chapters. So I will definitely be finishing that up this week. In last week's video, I mentioned that I was enjoying it so much that I might just finish it. But I decided to stick to the reading schedule and read 2 chapters a day because I was really enjoying savoring this story because I'm enjoying it a lot. I will kind of give my final thoughts next week once I finished it, but there was 2 things that I wanted to comment on today. One was this hilarious bit between Michael Henchard and one of his workers. One of his workers is having a hard time getting to work on time. In the morning, he sleeps in. And the way that he tries to create an alarm clock for himself in the Victorian time period just cracked me up. Poor Abel, as he was called, had an inveterate habit of oversleeping himself and coming late to work. His anxious will was to be among the earliest, but if his comrades omitted to pull the string that he always tied round his great toe and left hanging out the window for that purpose, his will was as wind. He did not arrive in time. Isn't that awesome? He tied a string around his toe and hung it out the window. Oh my goodness, that was so awesome. All right, and then there was a word that was used in at the beginning of chapter 29 that I had never heard of, but I loved it. I looked it up. The word is concatenation. Concatenation. I'm not entirely sure if I'm saying that correctly, but the word means a series of interconnected things or events. And I just thought that was great. I had never heard that before. Here's how it's used in the book. That she had chosen for her afternoon walk the road along which she had returned to Casterbridge 3 hours earlier in the carriage was curious. If anything should be called curious in concatenations of phenomena wherein each is known to have its accounting cause. There you go. So yeah, I am enjoying The Mayor of Casterbridge, and I will have some thoughts to share with you next week when I have finished it. I also started Poor Miss Finch by Wilkie Collins. It turns out that Miriam, and I will put her channel name here because I just completely blanked out for a second. She was also planning to read this for Victober, so we thought we would do a buddy read, and so we've just started this, but boy am I loving it. I was reminded instantly how much I love Wilkie Collins. He is my favorite Victorian author. I just can't help myself. I love the way that he writes. And Poor Miss Finch is the read that I am doing for Kate Howe's prompt to read a Victorian book with chronic illness or disability representation. The main character, Lucilla Finch, is blind. And yeah, the minute I started reading this, I was reminded about how much I love Wilkie Collins. I wanted to share with you from his dedication because I thought this was fascinating. He wrote this: more than one charming blind girl in fiction and in the drama has preceded Poor Miss Finch. But so far as I know, blindness in these cases has always been exhibited more or less exclusively from the ideal and the sentimental point of view. The attempt here made is to appeal to an interest of another kind by exhibiting blindness as it really is. I have carefully gathered the information necessary to the execution of this purpose from competent authorities of all sorts. Whenever Lucilla acts or speaks in these pages with reference to her blindness, she is doing or saying what persons afflicted as she is have done or said before her. Of the other features which I have added to produce and sustain interest in the central personage of my story, it does not become me to speak. It is for my readers to say if Lucilla has found her way to their sympathies. In this character, and more especially again in the character of Nugent Dubourg and Madame Pratolungo, I have tried to present human nature in its inherent inconsistencies and self-contradictions, in its intricate mixture of good and evil, of great and small, as I see it in the world about me. But the faculty of observing character is so rare, the curiously mistaken tendency to look for logical consistency in human motives and human actions is so general that I may possibly find the execution of this part of my task misunderstood, sometimes even resented, in certain quarters. However, time has stood my friend in relation to other characters of mine in other books, and who can say that time may not help me again here? Perhaps one of these days I may be able to make use of some of the many interesting stories of events that have really happened, which have been placed in my hands by persons who could speak as witnesses to the truth of the narrative. Thus far, I have not ventured to disturb the repose of these manuscripts in the locked drawer allotted to them. The true incidents are so far-fetched, and the conduct of the real people is so grossly improbable. As for the object which I have had in view in writing this story, it is, I hope, plain enough to speak for itself. I subscribe to the article of belief which declares that the conditions of human happiness are independent of bodily affliction, and that it is even possible for bodily affliction itself to take its place among the ingredients of happiness. These are the views which poor Miss Finch is intended to advocate, and this is the impression which I hope to leave on the mind of the reader when the book is closed. And he wrote that January 16th, 1872. Note to the present edition. In expressing my acknowledgments for the favorable reception accorded to the previous editions of this story, I may take the present opportunity of adverting to one of the characters not alluded to in the letter of dedication. The German oculist Herr Gross has impressed himself so strongly as a real personage on the minds of some of my readers afflicted with blindness or suffering from diseases of the eye that I have received several written applications requesting me to communicate his present address to patients desirous of consulting him. Sincerely appreciating the testimony thus rendered to the truth of this little study of character, I have been obliged to acknowledge to my correspondents, and I may as well repeat it here, that Herr Gross has no individual living prototype. Like the other persons of the drama in this book and in the books which have preceded it, he is drawn from my general observation of humanity. I have always considered it to be a mistake in art to limit the delineation of character in fiction to a literary portrait taken from any one sitter. The result of this process is generally, to my mind, to produce a caricature instead of a character. November 27th, 1872. I thought that was so interesting. I also find it interesting that the subtitle for Poor Miss Finch is A Domestic Story. So now I am very curious to know, will it still have elements of the sensational, which I love, or is Wilkie Collins trying something completely different in the story? I will find out. I've just started it. But here is the first 3 paragraphs for you because they are excellent. Chapter the 1st. Madame Pratolungo presents herself. You are here invited to read the story of an event which occurred in an out-of-the-way corner of England some years since. The persons principally concerned in the event are a blind girl, 2 twin brothers, a skilled surgeon, and a curious foreign woman. I am the curious foreign woman, and I take it on myself, for reasons which will presently appear, to tell the story. So far we understand each other. Good. I make myself known to you as briefly as I can. And then she goes on to talk about her past. Isn't that fantastic? I love the voice of this narrator already. So yeah, so even though I'm just getting started, I am loving this book so far and can't wait to continue reading it, and I'm really looking forward to the discussions that I will have with Miriam about this book. All right. I have also made progress in Jack Sheppard by William Harrison Ainsworth. I am just over 200 pages into that, and I am just really enjoying that one as well. So I have read Epoch the First, which took place in 1703, where we meet Jack Sheppard, the titular character of this story. In Epoch the First, two infants are dramatically rescued, Jack Sheppard and Thames Durrell. One grows up in the slums, Jack, and the other is adopted by carpenter Mr. Wood, who saved him, and that's Thames Durrell. Epoch the Second takes place in 1715, where Jack who is now 12 or 13, it's a little unclear, is an apprentice to Mr. Wood. And I have to say, I am just really, really enjoying this story. And I wanted to share this one quote with you to give you a kind of a little glimpse into the way that William Harrison Ainsworth writes. If there is one thing on earth more lovely than another, it is a fair girl of the tender age of Winifred Wood. Her beauty awakens no feeling beyond that of admiration. The charm of innocence breathes around her as fragrance is diffused by the flower, sanctifying her lightest thought and action and shielding her like a spell from the approach of evil. Beautiful is the girl of 12, who is neither child nor woman, but something between both, something more exquisite than either. I thought that was great. All right, so Jack Sheppard, I'm continuing on with that. And I read Lois the Witch in Elizabeth Gaskell's Gothic Tales. This is actually closer to a novella because it was 87 pages long. It takes place in Salem, Massachusetts in 1692 or 91. And I really enjoyed this. It was such a fascinating look at what happened surrounding those Salem witch trials. How did it get to that point? How do people allow themselves to be taken in and run mad with this idea? And so, yeah, I really enjoyed it, and I will be continuing on and reading the last few short stories in here. There are just 3 more: The Crooked Branch, Curious If True, and The Gray Woman. All right, I have continued listening to The Woman in White, narrated by Ian Holm. This is a reread for me, and I wanted to listen to it this time just for fun. I didn't actually get a chance to listen to very much, so I'm still only 13% in, but I am enjoying that. Okay, I have also hunted down the detective stories of Charles Dickens, and I am loving this. I just read the introduction and the first story in here, and I'm really, really enjoying this. I'm glad I decided just off the cuff to add this into my reading. It does mean that I am currently reading 5 Victorian books, but I'm okay with that. There's a review at on the cover here by P.D. James that says, reaffirms that the influence of Charles Dickens on the development and achievements of detective fiction is unchallengeable. So this book was edited and the introduction was written by Peter Hanning, and there was a few really interesting things in the introduction that I wanted to share with you. First of all, Dickens was no armchair detective story writer. He traveled the night streets of London in the company of detective officers to see their work at first hand. He frequently attended the London Magistrates' Court and was present at a number of important murder trials. He took a close interest, too, in several of the most notorious criminals of the day, including Harry Hockett, the Hampstead Killer, and James Bloomfield Rush, a Norfolk farmer who was convicted of murdering 2 of his neighbors. Dickens even visited the scene of Rush's crime in 1849, although he later confessed in a letter to a friend that he was, quote, very unimpressed at the manner in which the search for the murder weapon was being conducted by the local police. Dickens actually turned detective himself on one occasion when a pickpocketer who might have stepped right out of the pages of Oliver Twist tried to dip the author's pockets as he was walking along a busy London thoroughfare. Feeling a hand steal inside his coat, and without a second moment's thought, Dickens spun round, and with the guilty party took to his heels, he ran after him. Following a lengthy chase through crowded streets, the pickpocket was apprehended, subdued, and handed over to by an understandably triumphant Dickens to his friends, the police. He also enjoyed creating and solving puzzles in the manner of the amateur detective. When Adam Bede, the first novel by George Eliot, Mary Ann Evans, was published in 1859, Dickens guessed the sex of the anonymous author as soon as he read the book. Writing in a letter to a friend, he said, "If those 2 volumes, or a part of them, were not written by a woman, then I should begin to believe that I am a woman myself." And then at the end of his introduction, he writes this: "Together, the stories in this book represent Charles Dickens' contribution to detective fiction, and the influence each has had on the genre is not difficult to see. Indeed, I wholeheartedly agree with what another of today's leading crime novelists, Peter Lovesey, wrote recently. The architects of the popular detective story, like Dickens, built citadels of suspense that still dominate the scene. In the pages that follow, you are invited to visit again those citadels and judge for yourself the qualities of the men who were Charles Dickens's pioneer detectives." All right. So that is it for the Victorian literature that I am currently reading. So let's dive into the 2 books that I finished. These were mysteries set in the Victorian era. First up is an advanced reader copy that I received through Book Sirens, and that was for a book called Murder at an Exhibition by Lisa M. Lane. And this has just come out, and she has set her book in 1863. I discovered afterwards that this is actually the 2nd book in a series. And in this book, a photographer is discovered murdered at an exhibition being held in the National Portrait Gallery, I believe. And investigations ensue. One thing that I enjoyed was that the action starts right away, because the murder happens, the murder is discovered in chapter 1, and then the story backs up to a few days before the events, and then continues on. The author used real personages in with her fictional characters, including Rossetti. So that was interesting. I thought that the book was very well researched. There was some really interesting historical detail. The mystery was okay, although I did find the solution a tad unsatisfying. My biggest hitch with this book was that although it was very well researched, there was even a bibliography at the end which shows how well researched this book was. The author gave in to that temptation to include all of the research, everything she discovered in her story. And it just got to be a bit much, even to the point where I felt like there was stuff in there that, although I found it interesting, historically it is very interesting, it didn't have a place in this particular story. So for example, one of the characters, who is an artist, she draws for illustrated magazines, like the London Illustrated News, for example. She gets sent to draw the new sewers that Basilgate is creating. Now, Basilgate sewers is a fascinating piece of Victorian history that I do find really interesting, but it did not have a place in this story. It did nothing to advance the plot. There was nothing about the mystery. It didn't need to be in there. And so that was my biggest thing with this book, that turned it from what could have been a really great story into just an okay story. I also have to say that the author there were some problems with modern day sensibilities put in a story that takes place in 1863, which I know a lot of authors just can't seem to get away from that nowadays, but I just thought I would mention that. So, I mean, I did think that it was well written, and I read the whole thing and pretty much enjoyed the story. I enjoyed how she included a few historical figures, but yeah, it was a bit much with all of the history and all of the research being included in the story. So that was Murder at an Exhibition by Lisa M. Lane. I think I ended up giving it 3 stars. And then I also read the latest in the Kat Holloway series by Jennifer Ashley, and this is The Secret of Beau Lane. I don't want to say too much about this because if you haven't read the previous books, then it's going to be very spoilery. But this one is a mystery that hits very close to home to Kat herself. It involves her past, and I loved it. I really enjoyed it. I love this series. I love the way the author writes these mysteries and the characters that are involved. I loved that. Now, the relationship between Kat and Daniel is something that drove me absolutely crazy. Although it ended well, it drove me crazy, and I need to talk about it, so I'm just going to put spoiler across the screen. I'm not going to spoil anything else except just kind of this bit about Kat and Daniel. So if you don't want to know, then just fast forward so you don't see spoiler on the screen anymore. Okay, they have had a bit of a rocky relationship, and I understand that because of their past, because, you know, Kat's relationship with her deceased husband, she has some trust issues. I do get that. Daniel is not allowed to talk about his work very much. He's also maybe just a little more private of a person, whatever. But what drove me crazy in this book is that Kat was still hemming and hawing over whether or not she trusts Daniel. And that lasted for so much of this book, and it drove me crazy. If she doesn't know that she can trust Daniel by now, then she needs to just drop him altogether. Because she may not know everything about his past, but she knows enough about his current actions to know whether or not he is a trustworthy man. And he is. And so the fact that she kept hemming and hawing and that she insisted on talking to other people about his past drove me crazy. I really dislike that trope in relationships. It kind of adds this unnecessary conflict, I think. And I think part of this, her lack of trust in Daniel, it comes out with how irritated she is that he uses disguises in his work and that he's so good at it. I mean, leave him alone. It's his job, and if it's going to protect him to use a disguise, what is wrong with that? So, I mean, that itself also drove me a little bit crazy. And then to compile my irritation, Kat herself was not willing to be completely honest with Daniel. So how can she be upset when he's not honest with her? Okay, rant over. It did kind of resolve itself in the end. And so that's good. But that just irritated me so much. But aside from that, I really enjoyed this book and I really enjoyed this series. Okay, so that is my wrap up for the second week of Victober. Have you been reading any of these books that I've been reading? Would you like to chat about them? Let me know what you are currently reading for Victober, or if you are currently reading, say, any historical mysteries that are set in the Victorian time period. I would love to chat with you in the comment section down below, and I will see you for another video soon. Bye.